The shelter smelled of disinfectant and desperation. In the far corner, behind a wall of gleaming kennels filled with wagging tails and hopeful barks, sat a cage that visitors hurried past. Inside, a German shepherd lay motionless, patches of fur missing, eyes crusted, breath labored. The shelter staff had named him Max, though few bothered to acknowledge him at all. "We've got a lovely retriever puppy over here," the volunteer said, steering Sarah Thompson away. But little Emma had already stopped, her tiny hand reaching toward the cage that everyone else avoided. "Doggy," Emma whispered, her rare word hanging in the sterile air. Sarah tried to pull her daughter away, but Emma's feet planted firmly. Her big blue eyes filled with tears as she stared at the broken animal. Something passed between them, a recognition beyond words. The shelter volunteer sighed. "That one's scheduled for tomorrow," she said quietly, checking her clipboard. Sarah understood the unspoken meaning. "Tomorrow?" "We've tried everything. No one wants a dog that sick. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. Sarah Thompson wasn't looking for complications in her life. At 32, widowhood had taught her that life delivered enough challenges without seeking them out. 3 years ago, her husband Michael had left for his third tour of duty overseas with a kiss on her pregnant belly and promises of return. 2 months later, men in uniform arrived at her door with folded flags and rehearsed condolences. She'd given birth to Emma alone in a sterile hospital room, clutching Michael's dog tags instead of his hand. The birth had been difficult. Emma arrived 6 weeks early, her tiny lungs struggling for air, her little heart working too hard. The doctors hadn't been optimistic, but Emma proved to be as stubborn as her father. She fought, she survived, and she thrived in her own quiet way. Their small 2-bedroom house in Millfield, with its peeling paint and creaking porch steps, wasn't much, but Sarah had made it a home. The military benefits covered the mortgage, but little else. Sarah worked at the local diner 5 days a week while her elderly neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, watched Emma. It wasn't the life she'd imagined, but it was theirs, and Sarah protected it fiercely. Emma was different from other children her age. At 2 years old, she spoke rarely, but when she did, her words carried weight beyond her years. Her pediatrician had suggested she might be on the spectrum, but Sarah recognized something else in her daughter. A depth of feeling, an old soul's wisdom trapped in a toddler's body. Emma's eyes seemed to understand pain in ways no child should. The town of Millfield was small enough that most people knew Sarah's story. They offered casseroles and sympathetic smiles, watched Emma in church while Sarah stepped outside to cry, and pretended not to notice when Sarah wore the same dress to every function. It was a community that prided itself on taking care of its own, even if that care sometimes felt suffocating. Every year, on Michael's birthday, Sarah took Emma to the animal shelter. Michael had loved dogs, had always talked about getting a German shepherd when he returned home for good. It was their small tradition. They would visit, donate what little they could spare, and Emma would get to pet the puppies. They never stayed long. They never planned to bring one home. Until today. The Millfield Animal Shelter was housed in what used to be a hardware store, its concrete floors and fluorescent lighting doing little to disguise its industrial past. Sarah held Emma's hand as they walked past the reception desk, nodding at Brenda, the shelter director, who recognized them from their annual visits. "Back again, Thompson girls," Brenda smiled, her weathered face crinkling at the corners. "We've got some lovely puppies in this week, golden retriever mix, 8 weeks old." "Just our yearly visit," Sarah reminded her gently. "Michael would have been 35 today." Brenda's smile softened with understanding. "Of course. Take your time. Maybe one day you'll find a special one to take home." Sarah gave her practiced response. Maybe someday. But she knew the truth. Their small house, her unpredictable work schedule, and most importantly, her tight budget, made pet ownership a luxury they couldn't afford. This was a ritual of remembrance, not a shopping trip. Emma tugged at her hand. pulling her toward the kennels with surprising strength for such a small body. Usually Emma was content to look at the puppies, perhaps pet one or two under supervision, and then leave. Today, however, there was determination in her step. They passed the puppy section, Emma barely glancing at the tumbling balls of fluff that normally captivated her. Sarah felt a prickle of concern as Emma continued pulling her toward the back of the shelter, where the longer-term residents were kept. That's when they saw him. In the last kennel, separated from the others, lay a German shepherd so thin his ribs were visible through patchy fur. His coat, which should have been rich black and tan, was dull and missing in spots. His nose was crusted with discharge, and his eyes, when he managed to open them at Emma's approach, were cloudy with infection. "Oh, Emma, no," Sarah whispered, trying to pull her daughter back. "That doggie is sick. We should look at the healthy ones." But Emma planted her feet, a gesture Sarah recognized all too well. Her daughter might speak rarely, but her body language communicated volumes. Emma pointed at the dog with absolute certainty. "Doggie's sick," she said clearly, one of her rare full sentences. "Need help." A shelter volunteer named Jason approached, clipboard in hand. "I see you've found Max," he said, his voice tinged with sadness. "He's had a rough go of it." "What's wrong with him?" Sarah asked, though part of her didn't want to know. Engaging with this dog's story would make it harder to walk away, and walking away was exactly what they needed to do. Jason knelt down to Emma's level, seeming to recognize that she was equally invested in the answer. "Max here was born to championship lines. His parents were award-winning German shepherds, but he had some health problems right from the start. His breeder wanted perfect puppies to sell for top dollar, so Max was—" Jason paused, glancing at Emma before choosing his words carefully. "Asked to leave." "They abandoned him?" Sarah asked, anger flaring. "Essentially. He was rescued by an elderly veteran, Mr. Holloway, who cared for him for about 6 months. Unfortunately, Mr. Holloway passed away, and his family wouldn't keep Max. They surrendered him here." Emma had moved closer to the kennel, her small fingers now pressed against the chain link. To Sarah's surprise, the sickly dog had dragged himself to his feet and was limping toward Emma's hand. Jason continued. "Max was adopted once, about a month ago. Nice family, seemed really committed, but they brought him back after a week. Said he cried all night, every night. We think he was grieving Mr. Holloway." Sarah watched as Max gently pressed his nose against Emma's fingers. Despite his obviously painful condition, his tail gave a weak wag. "What's wrong with him medically?" Sarah asked. Jason sighed. "The works, I'm afraid. Severe mange, which is causing the hair loss and skin infections, upper respiratory infection, malnutrition, and he needs surgery for a condition called hip dysplasia. It's common in German shepherds, but without treatment, he'll eventually lose his ability to walk. And the cost of all that would be—" "Substantial," Jason admitted. "The medications for the infections and mange would run a few hundred. The surgery," he hesitated, "probably around 4,000 plus follow-up care." Sarah felt her heart sink. Her car wasn't worth $4,000. Her annual salary barely covered their existing bills. This was exactly why they couldn't have a dog, especially not one with expensive medical needs. "Emma, honey, we need to look at the other dogs," Sarah said gently, reaching for her daughter's hand. But Emma shook her head firmly. "This one," she said, her voice clear and certain. She looked up at Sarah with Michael's eyes blue and unwavering. "Please, Mommy, he's sad." Jason cleared his throat. "I should mention, Max is scheduled for evaluation tomorrow. We've had him for 2 months now, and with his medical needs—" He didn't need to finish. Sarah knew what evaluation meant in shelter terms. This dog was out of time. Could we have a moment with him?" Sarah asked, surprising herself. Jason nodded, unlocking the kennel door. "Just be careful. He's not aggressive, but he's in pain." As the door opened, Sarah expected the dog to retreat in fear. Instead, Max limped forward, his movements clearly painful but determined. Emma sat down on the concrete floor, seemingly unconcerned about her pretty dress, the one Sarah had ironed carefully that morning. "Gentle, Emma," Sarah cautioned, kneeling beside her daughter. But her warning was unnecessary. Emma reached out with extraordinary tenderness, her small hand hovering near Max's muzzle. The dog sniffed her fingers, then, in a gesture that squeezed Sarah's heart, gently licked Emma's palm. "See, Mommy?" Emma whispered. "He knows." "Knows what, sweetie?" Emma placed her hand on the dog's bony head with such gentleness it brought tears to Sarah's eyes. "He knows, Sid, like us." In that moment, looking at her quiet daughter connecting with this broken animal, Sarah felt Michael's absence with fresh intensity. What would he have done? The answer came immediately. Michael would have already been at the front desk filling out adoption papers. "We can't save everyone, Emma," Sarah said softly, though the words felt hollow even as she spoke them. Emma looked up at her mother, her eyes wiser than any 2-year-old should be. "Save one," she said simply. Sarah Thompson had made many difficult decisions in her life. She'd decided to marry Michael despite knowing the risks that came with loving a soldier. She'd decided to keep their small house after his death when everyone suggested selling. She'd decided to raise Emma alone when her parents offered to have them move in. But standing in that shelter, watching her daughter's small hand stroke the matted fur of a dying dog, she felt wholly unprepared for this particular decision. "Jason," she called, her voice steadier than she felt, "what's involved in the adoption process?" The volunteer's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "For Max? Are you serious?" "I'm asking about the process," Sarah clarified, not quite believing she was considering this. "That's all." Jason quickly explained the standard procedure: application forms, reference checks, home visits, a waiting period. "But honestly," he added, lowering his voice, "for Max's situation, we might expedite things. He doesn't have much time left at the shelter, and he needs medical attention soon." Emma hadn't moved from Max's side. The dog had settled his head in her lap, his roomy eyes fixed on her face as if she were the only thing worth seeing in his world. "I have to be honest with you," Sarah said. "I'm a single mom. I work long hours. I can't afford expensive vet bills." She swallowed hard. "I'm probably the last person who should adopt a special needs dog." Jason nodded sympathetically. "I understand. It's a huge commitment." "Mommy," Emma called softly, "Max is coming home." It wasn't a question or a request. In her daughter's mind, the decision was already made. Sarah felt a flutter of panic. How could she explain financial reality to a 2-year-old? How could she make Emma understand that wanting to help wasn't always enough? "Let me make a call," Jason said suddenly, stepping away with his phone. Sarah knelt beside Emma and Max. "Sweetheart, we need to think about this. Dogs need food and medicine and toys. This dog needs a lot of medicine." Emma stroked Max's ear with such tenderness that Sarah felt her throat tighten. "We help him," Emma said simply. Before Sarah could respond, Jason returned. "I talked to Brenda. She says if you're serious about adopting Max, she can come to your house today for the home inspection. We have a program for medical needs pets that might help with some of the initial costs." Sarah felt simultaneously cornered and rescued. I don't know if my house is ready for inspection." "It doesn't need to be perfect," Jason assured her. "We just need to make sure it's safe for Max." 3 hours later, Sarah found herself signing adoption papers. Brenda had indeed come to inspect their modest home, pronouncing it perfectly adequate for a dog in Max's condition. The shelter had waived the adoption fee and provided a starter kit of medications for Max's infections, along with special shampoo for his mane. "The real challenge will be the surgery," Brenda had warned her. "Our medical fund can cover about 1/4 of the cost, but You'll need to find the rest." Sarah had nodded, already mentally calculating which bills could be delayed, which possessions might be sellable. She knew it was irresponsible, perhaps even foolish, but the look on Emma's face when Brenda said they could take Max home was worth any financial hardship. Getting Max into the car had been a challenge. The German Shepherd was too weak to jump, and when Sarah attempted to lift him, he yelped in pain. Eventually, Jason helped them, showing Sarah how to support Max's hindquarters to minimize pressure on his dysplastic hips. The drive home was silent except for Max's labored breathing. Emma sat in her car seat, eyes never leaving the dog, who lay across the back seat, his head resting on the edge of her booster. "We're really doing this," Sarah murmured to herself, catching glimpses of them in the rearview mirror. They looked like a tableau of mismatched brokenness. The silent child, the dying dog, the struggling mother trying to hold it all together. At home, Sarah faced the first of what she suspected would be many Max challenges, getting him inside. The 3 steps to their front porch might as well have been a mountain. Max tried valiantly, but collapsed on the first step, whimpering. "Wait here," Sarah told Emma, dashing inside to grab a blanket. She fashioned a makeshift sling and with trembling arms managed to half-carry, half-guide Max into the house. By the time they were inside, Sarah's back ached, and she was covered in dog hair and whatever crusty substance coated Max's fur. Emma immediately led Max to the living room, where she patted the small rug by the electric fireplace. "Bed," she declared. Sarah started to explain that they would need to create a proper space for Max, perhaps in the laundry room where his mess could be contained, but stopped when she saw Max gingerly settle himself on the rug. He sighed deeply, the first sound of contentment she'd heard from him, and Emma sat cross-legged beside him. "I need to give him his medicine," Sarah said, unpacking the supplies Brenda had provided, "and maybe a bath." But as she approached with the pills wrapped in a piece of cheese, Max's body tensed. His eyes, though clouded with infection, showed clear fear. "It's okay, boy," Sarah said softly. "This will help you feel better." Max turned his head away, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Sarah froze, suddenly remembering all the articles she'd read about aggressive dogs, about bite statistics, about German Shepherds in particular. What had she done bringing this unknown animal into their home, so close to Emma? But before she could retreat, Emma reached out and took the cheese-wrapped pill from Sarah's hand. "Max," she said firmly, holding it in front of his nose. "Medicine. Good boy." To Sarah's astonishment, Max gently took the cheese from Emma's palm, swallowing the pill without protest. The bath proved to be a greater challenge. Max was too large for their small bathroom sink, and too weak to stand in the bathtub. Eventually, Sarah settled on using warm, damp washcloths to clean the worst areas, promising herself they would figure out a better solution tomorrow. As night fell, Sarah prepared Max's medications and the special food the shelter had provided, an expensive prescription diet meant to help with his nutritional deficiencies. The cost of the food alone, once they ran out of the shelter's supply, would strain her budget. "Bedtime, Emma," Sarah announced after dinner. Emma shook her head, pointing to Max, who had barely moved from the rug all evening. "Stay with Doggy." "Max will be fine out here," Sarah assured her. "You need your sleep." But at midnight, when Sarah checked on Emma, her daughter's bed was empty. She found Emma curled up beside Max on the living room rug, her small body pressed against his side, her hand resting on his bony shoulder. Max lifted his head when Sarah entered, his eyes tracking her movements with cautious alertness despite his exhaustion. "You're guarding her, aren't you?" Sarah whispered. Max's ears twitched, and he gently lowered his head, resting it protectively over Emma's feet. Something about the gesture, this sick, neglected animal positioning himself as her daughter's protector, broke something open in Sarah's heart. "Okay," she said softly. "You win." She fetched a blanket, spreading it over Emma and sitting down on the floor beside them both. But we're all going to need strength for tomorrow." As if understanding her words, Max closed his eyes. His breathing was still labored, occasionally hitching with pain, but there was a peacefulness to him now that hadn't been present at the shelter. Sarah leaned her head back against the sofa, wondering what on earth she had gotten them into. The cost of the surgery loomed in her mind, alongside more immediate concerns about how she would manage a sick dog while working full-time. Yet, watching Emma sleep peacefully beside Max, Sarah couldn't bring herself to regret their decision. "Michael," she whispered to the husband who wasn't there, "I could use some help with this one." Morning arrived with unwelcome clarity. Sarah had fallen asleep on the floor beside Emma and Max, waking with a stiff neck and the immediate weight of responsibility pressing down on her. Max looked worse in the daylight. The patches of missing fur were more pronounced, the skin beneath angry and red. His eyes were crusted shut, and his breathing sounded raspier than it had the night before. "Oh, Max," she whispered, careful not to wake Emma, who still slept soundly against the dog's side. Max's tail thumped weakly against the floor in response to her voice, but he didn't lift his head. Sarah wasn't a veterinarian, but she knew enough to recognize that Max needed professional care soon. She gently shook Emma awake. "Sweetie, I need to call the vet for Max. Can you help me give him his morning medicine?" Emma nodded solemnly, rubbing sleep from her eyes. She seemed to understand the gravity of Max's condition, moving with careful deliberation as she helped Sarah coax the dog to take his pills. Once again, Max accepted medicine from Emma that he had resisted taking from Sarah. The veterinarian's office was able to schedule an emergency appointment that afternoon. The receptionist's voice grew noticeably cooler when Sarah explained they'd just adopted Max from the shelter and were aware of his numerous health issues. "Dr. Reynolds will need to do a complete workup," the woman explained. "With the conditions you're describing, you should anticipate significant costs." Sarah closed her eyes, gripping the phone tighter. "I understand. We'll be there at 2. After hanging up, Sarah checked her bank balance on her phone. The numbers stared back at her, unforgiving in their inadequacy. Her paycheck had been deposited 2 days ago, and after the mortgage payment cleared, she would have just enough for groceries and utilities. There was nothing extra for extensive veterinary care, let alone major surgery. Sarah took a deep breath and did something she'd promised herself she would never do. She created a social media fundraising page. "Max the Miracle Dog," she titled it, uploading the one photo she'd taken of Emma and Max together at the shelter. She wrote honestly about their situation: a widowed military wife, a quiet child who had formed an immediate bond with a dying shelter dog, their limited resources but unlimited commitment to giving Max a chance at life. "I know there are many worthy causes," she wrote at the end, "many humans who need help. I don't expect miracles, but if you can spare anything to help Max get the surgery he needs, Emma and I would be forever grateful." She set the goal at $5,000, 0 cents, enough to cover the surgery and follow-up care, according to the shelter's estimate, and hit publish before she could change her mind. Then she turned her attention to preparing for the vet visit, pushing away the shame that burned in her chest. Getting Max into the car was even more difficult than it had been the day before. He seemed weaker, less able to support his own weight. By the time Sarah managed to settle him in the back seat with Emma, she was sweating and fighting tears of frustration. Dr. Reynolds was a tall woman with silver-streaked hair and hands that moved with confident efficiency. She examined Max thoroughly, her expression giving nothing away as she checked his eyes, ears, skin, and joints. Emma stood pressed against Sarah's side, watching with solemn intensity. "Well," Dr. Reynolds said finally, "you've got yourself a project here." Sarah swallowed hard. "How bad is it?" "The skin condition is severe demodectic mange. It's treatable, but will require medication and special baths. The respiratory infection is concerning. I'd like to start him on antibiotics immediately. But the hip dysplasia," she shook her head, "it's among the worst cases I've seen. He's in considerable pain, and without surgery his quality of life will be poor." "And with surgery?" Sarah asked. "Surgery, physical therapy, and proper care, he could have many good years ahead. German Shepherds are resilient." Doc Reynolds named a figure for the immediate treatment that made Sarah's stomach drop, followed by an estimate for the surgery that was even higher than the shelter had suggested. "I understand if this isn't feasible," the vet said gently, noticing Sarah's expression. "There are rescue organizations that specialize in German Shepherds. They might be able to take him and fund his treatment." "No," Emma said suddenly, her voice startling both women. "Max stays." Dr. Reynolds smiled at her. "You must be Emma. Max is lucky to have someone who cares about him so much." Emma nodded gravely. "I help him get better." Something in her daughter's certainty strengthened Sarah's resolve. "We'll find a way to cover the treatments," she told the vet. "Can we start with the most urgent needs today and work out a payment plan for the rest?" By the time they left the veterinary clinic, Max had received his first antibiotic injection, medication for pain management, and treatments for his skin condition. Sarah's credit card was maxed out, and they had an appointment scheduled for follow-up care the following week. The next few days fell into an exhausting routine. Sarah would wake early to give Max his medications and prepare special meals for him, then rush Emma to Mrs. Jenkins before heading to work at the diner. During her lunch break, she would check her fundraising page, her heart sinking a little more each day as the donations trickled in far slower than she had hoped. Some contributions came with kind messages, "Thank you for saving this beautiful dog," or "Emma reminds me of my granddaughter, bless you both." But others were less supportive. "Maybe if you can't afford a dog, you shouldn't have one," wrote someone named Carol. "There are children starving in this country, and you want money for a dog?" commented a man Sarah vaguely recognized from church. A week after bringing Max home, the fundraiser had raised just $820.00, a far cry from the $5.00 goal. Sarah was beginning to lose hope when she received a call from the local newspaper. "We saw your fundraiser," explained the reporter, a young woman named Jessica. "We'd like to do a story on Max and Emma, human interests, you know. It might help with your fundraising efforts." Sarah hesitated. She was a private person by nature, and the idea of exposing their struggle to the entire town made her uncomfortable. But then she thought of Max, who was still sleeping on the living room rug, still struggling to stand without help, still patiently enduring Emma's attempts to read him stories each night. "Okay," she agreed, "but the focus should be on Max, not on us." The article appeared 2 days later, complete with a photograph of Emma sitting beside Max, her small hand resting on his head. "Local child forms bond with dying sheltered dog," read the headline. The story was sensitively written, emphasizing Max's journey and the special connection between him and Emma. It mentioned the fundraiser, providing the link for those who wished to contribute. The response was immediate and polarizing. By that evening, the fundraiser had jumped to $2,400.00, with donations coming in from around the state. But Sarah's phone was also ringing with calls from people she knew, some offering support, others expressing concern or outright criticism. "I saw that article," said Linda from her church group. "Don't you think it's a bit much? All that money for a dog when the Thompson family lost everything in that fire last month?" "I just worry about Emma," said her former mother-in-law, Margaret, who had never fully approved of Sarah's parenting. "Having a sick animal in the house, getting attached to something that's just going to die anyway, it seems cruel." The most difficult call came from Brenda at the shelter. "Sarah, I need to tell you something. We've received a complaint about Max's adoption." "A complaint? From who?" "A family in Oak Ridge saw the article. They're claiming they want to adopt Max themselves. They're saying they have the resources to provide better care than you can." Sarah felt as if the floor had dropped away beneath her. "But Max is already adopted. He's ours." "I know that," Brenda assured her. "And legally, they don't have a leg to stand on. But They're a prominent family, Sarah. They donate a lot to the shelter. I just wanted to warn you that they might reach out directly." The family, the Prestons, did more than reach out. The following day, a sleek black SUV pulled into Sarah's driveway just as she was returning from work. A well-dressed couple emerged, their expressions set in practiced smiles that didn't reach their eyes. "Mrs. Thompson? I'm Richard Preston, and this is my wife, Elaine. We'd like to talk to you about your dog." Sarah instinctively stepped between them and her front door, where Emma and Max were waiting inside. "Max is not up for discussion." Richard's smile tightened. "We understand your attachment, but surely you can see this isn't an ideal situation. We have a large property, access to the best veterinary care, and, frankly, the financial resources to give that dog the life he deserves." "His name is Max," Sarah said, her voice steady despite her racing heart, "and he already has the life he deserves with people who love him." "Be reasonable," Elaine interjected, her diamond earrings catching the afternoon sun. "Our children are heartbroken thinking about that poor animal suffering because of financial constraints. We're prepared to compensate you, of course." The suggestion that she would sell Max like a used car struck Sarah like a physical blow. "Thank you for your concern, but we're managing just fine." "Are you?" Richard raised an eyebrow. "Because from what we hear, you're still quite far from your fundraising goal. The surgery he needs is time-sensitive." The truth of his words stung. Despite the newspaper article, they were still over $2,000, 0 cents, short of the amount needed for Max's surgery. Dr. Reynolds had warned that they shouldn't wait more than another month, as Max's condition was deteriorating. "We'll get there," Sarah said with more confidence than she felt. "Now, if you'll excuse me, my daughter is waiting." As the Prestons drove away, Sarah leaned against her front door, fighting back tears of frustration. When she finally composed herself and went inside, she found Emma sitting on the floor next to Max, showing him pictures in her favorite book. "Mommy sad?" Emma asked, looking up with those perceptive eyes that miss nothing. "No, honey," Sarah lied, forcing a smile. "Just tired." But that night, after Emma was asleep, Sarah sat at her small kitchen table with a notepad, calculating and recalculating their finances. Even with the fundraiser, even if she picked up extra shifts at the diner, even if she sold her mother's silver that she'd been saving for Emma's future, they would still come up short. Was she being selfish? Was her determination to keep Max actually harmful to him? The Prestons could give him everything he needed without a second thought to the cost. Max limped into the kitchen, his nails clicking softly on the linoleum. Despite his weakened state, he had taken to checking on Sarah throughout the evening, as if sensing her distress. "What should I do, Max?" she whispered as he rested his head on her lap. "Am I being unfair to you?" Max sighed deeply, looking up at her with eyes that, while still red and irritated, held absolute trust. Sarah gently scratched behind his ears, careful to avoid the tender spots where his skin was still healing. The next morning Sarah woke to the sound of Emma's laughter, a rare and precious sound that instantly brought her fully awake. She followed it to the living room, where Emma was sitting on the floor, giggling as Max gently licked her face. "Look, Mommy, Max is giving kisses." It was the most animated she had seen the dog since bringing him home. Though still clearly weak and in pain, Max seemed determined to engage with Emma, responding to her delight with cautious playfulness of his own. In that moment, watching her quiet daughter laugh openly with the dog everyone else had rejected, Sarah knew she couldn't give him up, not to the Prestons, not to anyone. They would find a way to afford his surgery if she had to work 3 jobs to do it. Her resolve was tested the very next day when Emma had her first seizure. It happened without warning. They were in the backyard, Sarah hanging laundry, while Emma played quietly near Max, who was resting in a patch of sunshine. Suddenly Max struggled to his feet, letting out a sharp bark that made Sarah turn. Emma was on the ground, her small body rigid, eyes rolled back. Sarah dropped the wet sheet and ran to her daughter, heart hammering with terror. "Emma! Emma!" she screamed, gathering the convulsing child in her arms. The seizure lasted less than a minute, but to Sarah it was an eternity. As Emma's body relaxed, her eyes fluttering open in confusion, Sarah was already running for the phone to call 911. What Sarah didn't notice in her panic was Max. Despite his painful hips, despite his weakness, the German Shepherd had positioned himself right beside Emma, body pressed protectively against hers, eyes alert and watchful. At the hospital, the doctors ran tests while Sarah paced the waiting room, blaming herself for missing signs that something was wrong with her daughter. When the doctor finally emerged, his expression was serious but not grave. "Emma's going to be fine," he assured Sarah. "What she experienced was a febrile seizure, relatively common in young children when they have a high fever. Her temperature is 103, likely from an ear infection we detected." Relief made Sarah's knees weak. "So it's not epilepsy or something worse?" "All her neurological tests look normal," the doctor confirmed. "We'll keep her overnight for observation, but I expect she'll be back to herself by tomorrow. Did she have any symptoms before the seizure? Complaints about ear pain, unusual behavior?" Sarah shook her head, then paused. "Actually, Max, our dog, he was acting strange just before it happened. He got up suddenly and barked, which he never does." The doctor looked thoughtful. "Interesting. Some dogs can detect changes in humans before we're aware of them. Shifts in body chemistry, subtle behaviors. It's possible your dog sensed something was about to happen." Sarah remembered how Max had been shadowing Emma even more closely the past 2 days, how he had seemed reluctant to let her out of his sight. Had he known? Was he trying to warn them? When they returned home the following day, Max greeted them at the door, moving with obvious pain but determined to reach Emma. He sniffed her carefully from head to toe, only relaxing when he seemed satisfied that she was well. That evening, Sarah received an email from Dr. Reynolds. "I saw the newspaper article about Max. A colleague of mine specializes in canine hip dysplasia and has offered to perform Max's surgery at a reduced rate. Please call my office to discuss." It was a small ray of hope, but combined with their fundraising efforts, it might be enough to get Max the care he needed. Sarah was about to call the vet when there was a knock at her door. Standing on her porch was a woman from Child Protective Services. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm Diane Wilson with Family Services. We've received a concern about your daughter's welfare. May I come in?" Sarah felt the blood drain from her face as she stared at the CPS worker standing on her porch. Diane Wilson was a middle-aged woman with a kind face that contrasted sharply with the official clipboard in her hands. For a moment, Sarah couldn't speak, her mind racing through all the possible reasons someone would report her. "Of course," she finally managed, stepping aside to let the woman enter. "May I ask what this is regarding?" Diane's eyes immediately fell on Max, who was lying on his rug in the living room with Emma sitting beside him. The German Shepherd raised his head alertly but didn't get up. "We received a report expressing concern about an ill animal in the home with a young child," Diane explained, her tone professional but not unkind. "Given your daughter's recent hospital visit, we're obligated to investigate." Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she gestured toward the couch. "Please, sit down. I can explain everything." As Diane settled onto the sofa, Sarah noticed Emma watching them with wide, wary eyes. Children were perceptive, especially Emma, who seemed to absorb emotional undercurrents like a sponge. "Emma, honey, why don't you read Max a story in your room?" Sarah suggested, forcing a smile. Emma looked hesitant, her eyes darting between her mother and the stranger. "It's okay, sweetheart. I just need to talk to this lady for a few minutes." After Emma had reluctantly disappeared down the hallway, Max struggling to follow her, Sarah turned back to Diane. "I can guess who made the report," she said quietly. "The Prestons." Diane's expression remained neutral. "I can't disclose that information, but I do need to understand the situation here. Your daughter was hospitalized yesterday, and from what I can see, you have a very ill dog in the home. Our concern is for Emma's health and safety." Sarah took a deep breath, working to keep her voice steady. "Emma had a febrile seizure from an ear infection. The hospital confirmed it was nothing more serious. As for Max, yes, he's sick. We adopted him from the shelter last week knowing he needed medical care, and he's receiving it. He has mange, which is not contagious to humans, and hip dysplasia, which requires surgery. And the surgery is scheduled." Sarah hesitated. "We're working on financing it. There's a veterinarian who's offered to do it at a reduced rate." Diane made a note on her clipboard. "Mrs. Thompson, I understand you're a single parent. Taking on a dog with expensive medical needs seems like an added burden in your situation." The implication stung, but Sarah refused to show it. "Max isn't a burden. He's family now. You should see him with Emma." Her voice caught unexpectedly. "My daughter doesn't connect easily with people. She's always been quiet, withdrawn. But with Max, she's different. She talks to him, laughs with him." "I understand the emotional attachment," Diane said gently, "but my job is to ensure that Emma's basic needs are being met. If your financial resources are being stretched thin by veterinary bills—" "Emma's needs have always come first," Sarah interrupted, an edge creeping into her voice. "She has never gone without anything essential, not food, not clothing, not medical care. Yes, we live simply. Yes, I have to budget carefully, but my daughter is well cared for." Diane nodded, her expression softening slightly. "May I see the rest of the house?" The next half hour was among the most humiliating of Sarah's life. She led Diane through their small home, acutely aware of every scuff on the wall, every worn piece of furniture, every sign of their modest circumstances. Diane checked the refrigerator and pantry, noting the contents. She examined Emma's room, bathroom, and the cleaning supplies stored safely out of reach. When they returned to the living room, Emma had reappeared with Max, who was lying at her feet while she flipped through a picture book. At Diane's request, Sarah reluctantly agreed to step outside so the social worker could speak with Emma alone. Standing on her own front porch, hands clasped tightly to stop their shaking, Sarah had never felt more powerless. Through the window she could see Diane kneeling to Emma's level, asking questions that Sarah couldn't hear. What if Emma said something that made their situation sound worse than it was? What if Diane decided that keeping Max was evidence of poor judgment? After what seemed like hours, but was probably only minutes, Diane opened the front door. "Thank you for your cooperation, Mrs. Thompson. I've completed my initial assessment." Sarah braced herself for the worst. "I don't see any immediate concerns regarding Emma's care," Diane continued. "Your home is clean, there's adequate food, and Emma appears well adjusted and bonded to you. Regarding the dog, while I understand the concerns that were raised, I don't see evidence that his presence poses a health risk to your daughter." Relief washed over Sarah like a physical sensation. "Thank you," she whispered. "That said," Diane added, her tone becoming more official, "I will need to file a report, and there may be a follow-up visit to ensure that the situation with the dog is resolved appropriately. If his condition deteriorates and proper veterinary care isn't provided, that could change our assessment." After Diane left, Sarah sank onto the porch steps, finally allowing the tears she'd been holding back. The weight of everything, Max's needs, Emma's seizure, the fundraising shortfall, the Prestons' interference, and now a CPS investigation, crashed down on her at once. Inside, she could hear Emma talking softly to Max, unaware of how close they might have come to being separated. Sarah wiped her eyes and stood up. There was no time for self-pity. She had calls to make, beginning with Dr. Reynolds about the surgery offer. The reduced rate would bring the cost down significantly, but they were still short by nearly $1,000. Sarah updated the fundraising page with the news about the specialist and Emma's seizure, mentioning how Max had seemed to sense it coming. Within hours, donations began increasing again, many with comments about seizure alert dogs and the special bonds between children and animals. That evening, Sarah's phone rang with an unfamiliar number. "Miss Thompson, this is Catherine Miller from WKTV News. We'd like to interview you about Max and your daughter for our evening broadcast." Sarah's initial instinct was to refuse. The newspaper article had already brought more attention than she was comfortable with, but the surgery was scheduled for the following week, and they were still short on funds. "Will it help Max?" she asked directly. "Human interest stories like yours often generate community support," Catherine replied carefully. "We can certainly include information about your fundraiser." Sarah agreed to the interview, scheduled for the next afternoon at their home. That night she lay awake long after Emma was asleep, wondering if she was doing the right thing. Exposing their private struggle to the public felt wrong, but what choice did she have? Max needed the surgery, and they were running out of options. The news crew arrived promptly at 2 o'clock. Catherine Miller was younger than Sarah had expected, with a camera operator in tow who immediately began assessing the lighting in their small living room. Sarah had dressed Emma in her nicest outfit and done her best to make the house presentable, but there was no hiding the reality of their modest circumstances. "We'll keep this casual," Catherine assured her. "Just be natural and tell us your story." The interview began with softball questions about how they had met Max and decided to adopt him. Sarah explained the shelter visit, Emma's immediate connection with Max, and their journey since bringing him home. When Catherine asked about the financial challenges, Sarah answered honestly. "It's been difficult," she admitted. "I'm a waitress raising a daughter on my own. Taking on Max's medical expenses wasn't something I planned for, but sometimes the right decisions aren't the easy ones." "And what would you say to people who suggest that adopting a dog with such serious health issues wasn't the responsible choice given your financial situation?" The question caught Sarah off guard. She glanced at Emma, who was sitting beside Max on his rug, oblivious to the camera capturing her gentle strokes along his back. "I would say that they're missing the point," Sarah replied carefully. "Responsibility isn't just about money. It's about commitment. It's about recognizing when something matters and doing whatever it takes to protect it. I made a promise to Max when we brought him home, and I intend to keep it." Catherine nodded, then shifted her focus to Emma. "And your daughter? I understand she had a health scare recently?" Sarah tensed. "Emma had a febrile seizure from an ear infection. She's fine now." "And there are reports that Max somehow predicted this seizure?" "He seemed to sense something was wrong just before it happened," Sarah acknowledged. "The doctor said some dogs can detect changes in humans that we can't perceive ourselves." Catherine leaned forward, her expression eager. "That's fascinating. Could Max be a natural seizure alert dog? Has Emma had seizures before?" "No, this was her first and hopefully last," Sarah said firmly. "The doctors said febrile seizures are common in young children and usually don't recur." She could see the disappointment flicker across Catherine's face at the loss of a more sensational angle. The interview wrapped up shortly after, with Catherine promising it would air on the evening news. "You did great," the reporter assured her as the crew packed up their equipment. "Stories like yours really resonate with viewers." After they left, Sarah felt drained. She had put their life on display, turning their private struggle into public entertainment in the hope that it would generate enough sympathy to help Max. The thought made her queasy. "Mommy," Emma asked, tugging at her hand, "is Max getting his fixing soon?" Sarah smiled down at her daughter. "Yes, sweetie, the doctor is going to help his hips not hurt anymore." "Good," Emma said with satisfaction. "He told me. They hurt a lot." Sarah blinked. "Max told you his hips hurt?" Emma nodded solemnly. Not with words, but I know. The simplicity of her daughter's understanding brought tears to Sarah's eyes. While adults complicated everything with judgments and calculations, Emma saw only what mattered. Max was in pain, and he needed help. The news segment aired that night at 6. Sarah watched nervously as Catherine's voice narrated over footage of Emma and Max together. A single mother with limited resources, a chronically ill shelter dog no one wanted, and a little girl with a special bond. It's a story that asks us all what we'd sacrifice for those we love. The piece was more sympathetic than Sarah had dared to hope, highlighting Max's journey and his connection with Emma without sensationalizing her seizure. It ended with information about the fundraiser and the upcoming surgery. By 9 o'clock that evening, the fundraiser had surpassed its goal, with donations continuing to come in. Sarah stared at the computer screen in disbelief, watching the number climb. They would have enough not just for the surgery, but for all of Max's follow-up care. Her phone rang. Dr. Reynolds calling to confirm their appointment with the specialist. "I saw the news piece," the veterinarian said warmly. "The response has been amazing. We're all set for Monday morning." After hanging up, Sarah sat on the floor beside Max, gently rubbing the spot between his ears that he liked. "You're getting your surgery," she told him softly. "You're going to feel so much better." Max's tail thumped weakly against the floor, his eyes fixed on her face with that same trusting expression she'd come to cherish. The night before the surgery, Sarah found herself unable to sleep. What if something went wrong? Dr. Reynolds had explained that while the procedure had a high success rate, there were always risks with anesthesia, especially for an animal in Max's weakened condition. The possibility of losing him now, after everything they'd been through, was unbearable. She crept into Emma's room to check on her, finding her daughter sleeping peacefully with one arm draped over Max, who had taken to sleeping on a blanket beside her bed. The German shepherd raised his head as Sarah entered, watchful but not alarmed. "We're doing this for you," she whispered to him. "Just be strong for a little longer." But as she turned to leave, Max let out a soft whine that stopped her. He was looking not at her but at Emma, his expression almost anxious. "She'll be fine," Sarah assured him, assuming he was concerned about being separated from Emma for the surgery. "Mrs. Jenkins will stay with her while I take you to the hospital." Max continued to stare at Emma, then back at Sarah, as if trying to communicate something important. An inexplicable chill ran down Sarah's spine. "What is it, boy? What's wrong?" But Max only settled his head back down beside Emma, his eyes still fixed on her sleeping form, alert and vigilant even in his exhaustion. The morning of Max's surgery dawned with a gray, misty rain that seemed fitting to Sarah's anxious mood. She had barely slept, disturbed by Max's unusual behavior the night before and her own mounting worries about the procedure. When her alarm went off at 5, she found Max already awake, still positioned protectively beside Emma's bed. "It's time, boy," she whispered, attaching his leash with hands that weren't quite steady. Max followed her reluctantly, looking back repeatedly at Emma's sleeping form. Sarah had to tug gently on his leash to get him to leave the room. In the kitchen, he refused his pre-surgery meal, another deviation from his normal behavior that heightened Sarah's unease. Mrs. Jenkins arrived at 6, still in her house dress but alert despite the early hour. The elderly neighbor had been their constant support since Michael's death, stepping in to watch Emma whenever Sarah needed help. "Don't you worry about a thing," she assured Sarah, patting her arm. "Emma and I will have a wonderful time. You just focus on getting that sweet dog the help he needs." "Thank you," Sarah said, bending to kiss Emma's forehead. Her daughter had woken just long enough to say goodbye to Max, wrapping her arms around his neck in a gentle hug that made Sarah's throat tighten. "I'll call as soon as he's out of surgery." The drive to the veterinary hospital took 40 minutes, Max sitting quietly in the back seat, his eyes fixed on the passing landscape. Occasionally he would whine softly, a sound that twisted Sarah's heart. "It's going to be okay," she told him, reaching back to stroke his head. "This is going to help you." At the hospital, Dr. Reynolds met them in the parking lot, a kindness that Sarah appreciated. The specialist, Dr. Harding, was already inside, preparing for the procedure. Getting Max from the car was a challenge. His legs seemed less cooperative than usual, and his body trembled with either pain or fear. "We'll take good care of him," Dr. Reynolds promised, as a veterinary technician gently led Max away. The last glimpse Sarah had of him was his face turning back toward her, eyes wide and somehow urgent, before he disappeared through a set of swinging doors. The waiting room was sterile and cold, with outdated magazines and uncomfortable plastic chairs. Sarah tried to distract herself by answering emails about the fundraiser, sending thank-you notes to donors, but her mind kept returning to Max. The surgery was expected to take several hours, followed by recovery time before she could see him. 2 hours into the wait, Sarah's phone rang. Her heart jumped, fearing it was the hospital with bad news, but the screen showed Mrs. Jenkins' number. "Sarah, I'm sorry to bother you, but Emma's not feeling well." Sarah sat up straighter, instantly alert. "What's wrong?" "She's very warm and complaining about her ear hurting again. I took her temperature, and it's 101.2. Not critically high, but concerning given Emma's recent seizure." "Did you give her the children's Tylenol from the bathroom cabinet?" "Yes, about 20 minutes ago. But she's getting more uncomfortable, and she keeps asking for Max. I thought you should know." Sarah closed her eyes, torn between her daughter's needs and her commitment to Max. "I'm still at the animal hospital. The surgery should be done in another hour or so." "Don't you worry," Mrs. Jenkins said firmly. "I can handle a fever. I raised 4 children of my own, remember? I just wanted to keep you informed." "Call me if her temperature goes any higher," Sarah instructed. "I'll be home as soon as I can." After hanging up, Sarah paced the waiting room, her anxiety now doubled. Emma's ear infection was returning, and Sarah wasn't there. Max was in surgery, his future uncertain. Everything that mattered to her was at risk, and she was powerless to help either of them. Another hour passed with excruciating slowness. Sarah called Mrs. Jenkins twice more, relieved to hear that Emma's temperature had stabilized, though she was still uncomfortable and asking repeatedly for Max. Finally, Dr. Reynolds emerged through the swinging doors, still wearing her surgical scrubs. Sarah stood immediately, searching the veterinarian's face for clues. "Max is in recovery," Dr. Reynolds said, and Sarah released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The surgery itself went well. Dr. Harding was able to repair the worst of the damage to both hips. "So he'll be okay?" Sarah asked, hearing the tremor in her own voice. Dr. Reynolds' expression grew more serious. "There's a complication, I'm afraid. Max's heart rate dropped significantly under anesthesia. We were able to stabilize him, but his vital signs are weaker than we'd like to see at this stage." The relief Sarah had felt moments before evaporated. "What does that mean?" "It means the next 24 hours are critical. We're monitoring him closely, but you should understand that his overall condition was poor going into this surgery. His body has been fighting multiple infections, malnutrition, and chronic pain for a long time." "But he was getting better," Sarah protested. "His skin was healing. He was eating well." "Yes, and those improvements gave him a fighting chance today," Dr. Reynolds assured her. "But recovery from major surgery is difficult, even for healthy animals. For Max, it's going to be an uphill battle." Sarah sank back into her chair, the weight of this new worry settling over her. "Can I see him?" "He's still unconscious, but yes, you can sit with him for a few minutes. Sometimes having someone familiar nearby can help during recovery." Dr. Reynolds led her through the swinging doors and down a corridor to a small recovery room. Max lay on a padded table, connected to monitors that beeped steadily if somewhat slowly. His hind legs were bandaged, and an IV line ran into his foreleg. He looked smaller somehow, more vulnerable than Sarah had ever seen him. "Oh, Max," she whispered, gently stroking his head. His eyes remained closed, his breathing shallow but regular. "Talk to him," Dr. Reynolds encouraged. "He may be able to hear you even if he can't respond." Sarah leaned close to Max's ear, her voice low and steady. "You need to fight, Max. Emma's waiting for you to come home. She needs you." Her voice caught on a sob. "We both do." She stayed with him for 15 minutes until a call from Mrs. Jenkins forced her to leave. Emma's fever had spiked suddenly to 103, and she was becoming increasingly agitated. "I think we should take her to urgent care," the elderly woman said, her voice tense with worry. "I'm on my way," Sarah said, already moving toward the exit. "Meet me there." As she hurried out, Dr. Reynolds called after her, "We'll call you with any changes in Max's condition." The drive to the urgent care center was a blur of rain-slicked roads and mounting fear. Sarah arrived to find Mrs. Jenkins in the waiting room with Emma in her lap, the child's face flushed with fever and streaked with tears. "Mommy," Emma whimpered, reaching for her. "Where's Max?" "Max is at the doctor's, too," Sarah explained, gathering her daughter into her arms. "They're helping his legs feel better, remember?" Emma buried her face against Sarah's shoulder. "He needs to come home. He told me." Sarah exchanged a worried glance with Mrs. Jenkins over Emma's head. "Sweetheart, Max is sleeping right now, but the doctors are taking good care of him." "No," Emma insisted with unexpected force. "He's scared. He wants to come home." Before Sarah could respond, a nurse called Emma's name. The examination confirmed that her ear infection had flared up again more severely than before. The doctor prescribed a stronger antibiotic and recommended they monitor her temperature closely. "If it goes above 104, or if she has another seizure, bring her to the emergency room immediately," he instructed. By the time they arrived home, Emma was drowsy from the fever and medication. Sarah carried her to bed, worrying about how light she felt in her arms. As she tucked the blankets around her daughter, Emma looked up with unnaturally bright eyes. "Is Max coming home tomorrow?" Sarah hesitated, unwilling to make a promise she might not be able to keep. "We'll see, honey. He needs to rest after his surgery." "He has to," Emma mumbled, already drifting toward sleep. "He has to help me." Sarah smoothed the damp hair from her daughter's forehead. "Help you with what, sweetheart?" But Emma had fallen asleep, her breathing quick and shallow. Sarah sat beside her, one hand resting lightly on her chest to feel each breath, the other holding her phone, waiting for news about Max. The call came just after midnight. Sarah had dozed off in the chair beside Emma's bed, but jerked awake at the first ring. "Mrs. Thompson, this is Dr. Keller, the night veterinarian at Capital Animal Hospital." The unfamiliar voice sent a chill through Sarah. "I'm calling about Max. Is he—" Sarah couldn't finish the question. "His condition has deteriorated," the vet said gently. "His breathing is labored, and he's developed a fever, which suggests his body may be fighting an infection. We've started him on additional antibiotics, but I wanted you to be aware of the situation." "Should I come in?" Sarah asked, looking at Emma's sleeping form. "There's nothing you can do here right now," Dr. Keller assured her. "We're doing everything possible for him. I'll call you immediately if there's any change." After hanging up, Sarah rested her head in her hands, overwhelmed by the feeling that everything was slipping away from her. Emma's fever, Max's struggle. It was too much, too fast. For the first time since Michael's death, she felt truly alone. Adrift in a sea of problems too large to navigate. "Michael," she whispered into the darkness, "I don't know how to fix this." Sleep eluded her for the rest of the night. She alternated between checking Emma's temperature and staring at her phone, willing it to ring with good news about Max. By dawn, Emma's fever had decreased slightly, but Sarah's worry had only grown. At 7 o'clock, her phone finally rang again. Dr. Reynolds' voice was grave. Sarah, I think you should come in. Max is fighting, but he's very weak. If you want to see him, it might be best to come soon." Sarah's world narrowed to a series of impossible choices. Emma was sleeping. Her fever reduced, but not gone. Max was failing at the animal hospital. She couldn't be in two places at once, yet both needed her. With shaking hands, she called Mrs. Jenkins, who answered on the first ring despite the early hour. "Nancy, I need to go to the animal hospital. Max is—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "Can you come stay with Emma?" "I'll be there in 10 minutes," Mrs. Jenkins promised without hesitation. Sarah gently woke Emma, checking her temperature once more before explaining that she needed to go see Max. "Is he coming home?" Emma asked, her voice small and fragile. "I hope so, sweetheart," Sarah replied, unable to lie but unwilling to share the gravity of the situation. "Mrs. Jenkins is going to stay with you while I check on him." Emma's eyes filled with unexpected tears. "Tell Max I need him." The simple declaration nearly broke Sarah's composure. "I will," she promised, kissing her daughter's forehead. The hospital parking lot was almost empty when she arrived, the early morning sky still dark with lingering rain clouds. Dr. Reynolds met her at the entrance, her face etched with fatigue from what had clearly been a long night. "He's hanging on," the veterinarian said, leading Sarah through the quiet corridors. "But his system is shutting down. The surgery itself was successful, but his body was too weak to handle the strain." In the intensive care unit, Max lay surrounded by monitoring equipment, his breathing shallow and labored. IV lines delivered medications and fluids, but even to Sarah's untrained eye, it was clear he was failing. His eyes were closed, his once alert ears limp. "Oh, Max," she whispered, kneeling beside the table. "I'm so sorry." Dr. Reynolds touched her shoulder gently. "You have nothing to apologize for. You gave him a chance that no one else would. Without the surgery, he would have suffered in pain until his body gave out. At least this way, he's comfortable." "Comfortable?" Sarah repeated the word bitterly. "He's dying." "We're still trying everything we can," Dr. Reynolds assured her. "But yes, you should prepare yourself for that possibility." Sarah stroked Max's head, careful to avoid the IV line. "Emma said to tell you she needs you," she told him softly. "She's sick again, Max. Her ear infection came back." At the mention of Emma's name, Max's ear twitched slightly, the first sign of awareness he'd shown since she arrived. "Did you see that?" Sarah asked, hope flaring briefly. Reynolds nodded cautiously. "He can hear you. Keep talking to him." For the next hour, Sarah sat beside Max, talking about Emma, about the home waiting for him, about all the things they would do once he recovered. Occasionally his ear would twitch or his tail would move almost imperceptibly, but his eyes remained closed, his breathing increasingly labored. Around 9 o'clock, a hospital technician entered the room. "Dr. Reynolds, there's someone here asking about this dog. He says it's urgent." Sarah looked up, instantly wary. "If it's the Prestons, tell them they can't—" "It's not," the technician interrupted. "It's a man named James Holloway. He says the dog belonged to his grandfather." Sarah and Dr. Reynolds exchanged surprised glances. "Holloway," Sarah repeated. "That was the name of the elderly veteran who rescued Max." "Do you want to speak with him?" Dr. Reynolds asked. Sarah hesitated, glancing at Max's still form. "Yes, but I don't want to leave Max." "We'll bring him back here," Dr. Reynolds decided, following the technician out. A few minutes later she returned with a tall man in his late 30s dressed in military fatigues. His face was tanned and weathered, his expression grave as he took in the scene before him. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, extending his hand, "I'm Captain James Holloway, United States Army. I understand you've been caring for my grandfather's dog." Sarah stood, shaking his hand automatically. "How did you find us?" "I saw the news story," he explained. I've been deployed overseas for the past 8 months. I just returned stateside yesterday and was catching up on local news when I saw the piece about Max and your daughter. I recognized him immediately." He moved to Mac's side, gently running a hand along the dog's flank. "He looks so different from when I last saw him. Grandfather called him Sergeant." Sorrow, repeated. Captain Holloway nodded, his eyes not leaving the dog. "He wasn't just any stray my grandfather took in. Sergeant was a military working dog, one of the best. He served 3 tours in Afghanistan, specializing in explosives detection." Sarah stared at him in disbelief. Max was a military dog, but the shelter didn't know anything about that. "My grandfather was private about his connections to the service. After Sergeant was injured during his last deployment, he was retired. The handler who had worked with him was killed in the same explosion that injured Sergeant. My grandfather, a decorated Vietnam veteran, offered to adopt him." Captain Holloway's voice grew softer. "They understood each other, I think. Both warriors, both carrying their scars." Dr. Reynolds, who had been listening intently, interjected, "This changes things. Military working dogs often have specialized veterinary records. Do you have access to those?" "I made some calls on my way here," Captain Holloway confirmed, pulling out his phone. "His full medical history is being sent over now. But there's something else you should know." He hesitated, looking directly at Sarah. "Sergeant wasn't just an explosives detection dog. He was cross-trained for medical alert." "Medical alert," Sarah repeated, her mind racing to Emma's seizure, to Mac's unusual behavior the night before surgery. "He was part of a pilot program," Captain Holloway explained. "Some dogs can detect changes in human biochemistry. Drops in blood sugar, oncoming seizures, even certain cancers. Sergeant showed extraordinary aptitude for it. That's why my grandfather was so insistent on taking him specifically. He'd been diagnosed with a heart condition, and he believed Sergeant could warn him if he was about to have an episode." Sarah sank back into her chair, pieces falling into place. "He knew," she whispered. "He knew Emma was going to have a seizure before it happened. And last night he was trying to tell me something was wrong with her." Captain Holloway nodded solemnly. "That sounds like Sergeant. Once he bonds with someone, their welfare becomes his mission." A notification chimed on his phone. "The records are here," he said, handing the phone to Dr. Reynolds, who began scrolling through the files with increasing interest. "This is incredibly helpful," she said after a moment. "We now have his complete medical history, including previous surgeries and medication responses." She looked up at Captain Holloway. "With your permission, I'd like to call in our internal medicine specialist to review this. There may be options we haven't considered." "Of course," he agreed immediately. "Whatever it takes. Cost is not an issue." As Dr. Reynolds hurried out to make the call, Captain Holloway turned back to Sarah. "I need to ask you something important, Mrs. Thompson. When my grandfather died, I was deployed. I couldn't take Sergeant then. My family," he hesitated, "they're not dog people. They saw only a large, aging military dog with health issues. I had no idea they'd surrendered him until I saw your news story." He took a deep breath. "Legally, I believe I have a claim to him as my grandfather's next of kin. But that's not why I'm here. I'm here because I promised my grandfather I would make sure Sergeant was taken care of." Sarah felt her heart constrict. After everything they'd been through, after all the battles they'd fought to keep Max, was this man going to take him away? "He has a home with us," she said quietly but firmly. "My daughter needs him." Captain Holloway held up his hand. "I'm not here to take him away from you. I've seen how much you've done for him, how far you've gone to give him a chance. I just want to help. If," he glanced at Max's still form, "if he pulls through, I want to make sure he has everything he needs. And I want to be part of his life, to honor my grandfather's memory." Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes, unexpected relief washing over her. "Of course," she managed. "Emma would love to hear stories about Max's sergeants passed. A commotion in the hallway interrupted them as Dr. Reynolds returned with another doctor and 2 technicians. "We're going to try something," she explained quickly. "Captain Holloway, the records you provided show that Sargent has successfully responded to a specific treatment protocol in the past. Dr. Patel is our internal medicine specialist, and she believes it's worth attempting." The next hour passed in a blur of activity as the veterinary team worked on Max, administering new medications, adjusting his fluids, monitoring his responses. Sarah and Captain Holloway waited outside the treatment room, both lost in their own thoughts. "Tell me about your daughter," Captain Holloway said eventually, breaking the silence. Sarah found herself talking about Emma, her quiet nature, her depth of feeling, the way she had connected instantly with Max. Captain Holloway listened attentively, his expression softening. "My grandfather would be pleased," he said when she finished. "He always said Sargent had a gift for finding the people who needed him most." Before Sarah could respond, her phone rang, Mrs. Jenkins calling with an update on Emma. The fever had risen again, and Emma was asking repeatedly for Max, becoming increasingly agitated. "She says she needs to see him," Mrs. Jenkins explained, sounding worried. "She's convinced something terrible is happening to him." Sarah looked through the window of the treatment room where the veterinary team still worked on Max. "I can't bring him home right now, Nancy. He's very sick." "Then perhaps you should bring her here," Captain Holloway suggested quietly. "If their bond is as strong as you say, perhaps they both need each other right now." The idea seemed impossible. Bringing a sick child to an animal hospital, what kind of mother would do that? But something in Captain Holloway's steady gaze gave her courage. "I'll be there soon," she told Mrs. Jenkins. "Have Emma ready to go." When Dr. Reynolds emerged from the treatment room, her expression was cautiously optimistic. "He's responding to the new protocol. His vitals are stabilizing, but he's still critical. The next few hours will tell us more." Sarah explained her plan to bring Emma to the hospital. Instead of the resistance she expected, Dr. Reynolds nodded thoughtfully. "There's research supporting the therapeutic value of human-animal bonds in recovery," she said. "And given what we now know about Max's training as a medical alert dog, the connection between him and Emma may be even more significant than we realized." An hour later, Sarah returned with Emma bundled in blankets. The child was feverish and tired, but her eyes were alert, scanning the hospital corridor anxiously. "Where's Max?" she asked immediately. "He's right in here, sweetheart," Sarah said, leading her to the room where Max was now resting more comfortably, Captain Holloway standing guard beside him. When Emma saw the German Shepherd surrounded by medical equipment, tears filled her eyes. Without hesitation, she approached the table, her small hand reaching out to touch his head. "Max," she whispered, "I came." And as everyone in the room watched in astonishment, Max's eyes slowly opened. 6 months could change everything. Sarah Thompson stood in her backyard, watching Emma chase Max across the fresh spring grass, and marveled at the transformation. Gone was the sick, skeletal dog they had rescued from the shelter. In his place bounded a healthy German Shepherd with a glossy black and tan coat, strong muscles rippling beneath fur that had grown back thicker than before. "Careful, Emma," she called instinctively, though the caution was unnecessary. Max adjusted his pace perfectly to the toddler's stumbling run, circling back whenever she fell too far behind, his movements fluid and painless thanks to his fully healed hips. The day of his recovery had seemed impossible during those dark hours at the animal hospital. After Captain Holloway's arrival and the revelation of Max's military background, Dr. Reynolds and Dr. Patel had worked tirelessly, using the specialized protocol from his service dog records. Still, Max had hovered between life and death for nearly 48 hours. The turning point had come when Emma, still feverish from her ear infection, had placed her small hand on Max's head and whispered something only he could hear. Within hours, his vital signs had begun to stabilize. The veterinarians called it remarkable. Captain Holloway called it a soldier responding to orders. But Sarah knew it was something deeper. a promise kept between two souls who had recognized each other's pain. "Lunch is ready," Sarah called, setting the picnic basket on their worn patio table. Emma came running, Max trotting dutifully beside her. The German shepherd no longer limped, no longer struggled to breathe. His eyes were clear and bright, his ears perpetually alert, especially when it came to Emma. Captain Holloway, James, as she now called him, arrived just as they were sitting down, carrying a folder tucked under his arm. "Sorry I'm late," he said, ruffling Emma's blonde curls. "Military paperwork takes forever, even for four-legged veterans." Over the past months, James had become a fixture in their lives. His initial visit to the hospital had evolved into regular check-ins, then helping with Max's physical therapy, then staying for dinner. He had stories about his grandfather that made Sarah laugh, military adventures that fascinated Emma, and a quiet understanding of Max that completed their unusual circle. "Is that what I think it is?" Sarah asked, nodding toward the folder as she handed him a sandwich. James smiled, setting the folder on the table. "Official certification. As of today, Sergeant Max Thompson is recognized as a service dog specializing in seizure alert." After Emma's second seizure during Max's recovery, neurological testing had confirmed what Max had somehow known all along. Emma had a mild form of epilepsy. The condition was manageable with medication, but Max's ability to detect oncoming seizures before they happened made him invaluable. The military had fast-tracked his service dog certification as recognition of his continued service. "Hear that, Max? You're official now," Sarah said, watching as the German shepherd sat at attention, almost as if he understood the significance. Emma, now approaching 3 years old and speaking in fuller sentences, patted Max's head. "Good boy. You helped me." The simplicity of her statement brought tears to Sarah's eyes. So much had changed since that fateful day at the shelter. The fundraiser had eventually raised over $12,000, 0 cents, covering not only Max's surgery, but establishing a small foundation to help other families adopt special needs pets. Sarah had reduced her dinerships to part-time, using her newfound skills as a social media manager to work from home. Even the Prestons had eventually come around, becoming significant donors to the foundation after seeing Max's remarkable recovery. Most surprising of all had been the community's response. After the initial controversy, after the CPS visit that had terrified Sarah, people had rallied around them. Diane Wilson, the social worker who had investigated them, had become an advocate, helping to establish protocols for service animals in homes with children. Mrs. Jenkins had organized a neighborhood support system, ensuring that Emma was never alone if Sarah needed to take Max to appointments. "There's something else," James said, pulling another document from the folder. "I've been meaning to tell you. I found these in my grandfather's papers." He handed Sarah a yellowed envelope. Inside were military records, letters, and a faded photograph of a young soldier standing beside a German shepherd that looked remarkably like Max. "That's Michael Thompson," James said quietly. "You're Michael." Sarah's hands trembled as she stared at the photo. "I don't understand." "My grandfather served with Michael during his first tour. They weren't in the same unit, but they crossed paths. Michael worked with the canine teams occasionally. He had a way with the dogs, apparently." James pointed to a handwritten note. "According to my grandfather's journal, Michael talked about wanting a German shepherd when he got home, specifically one like the military working dogs." Sarah pressed her hand to her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. "He never told me that part. He said he wanted a dog, but I didn't know. I think my grandfather remembered the name when he saw it on Sargent's paperwork after adopting him. He might have even made the connection to you, though he never mentioned it to my family." James smiled gently. "I like to think he would be pleased to know that Michael's dog found his way to Michael's family after all." The realization settled over Sarah like a warm blanket. Max hadn't come into their lives by chance or coincidence. Somehow, through a series of connections and circumstances that defied explanation, Michael's wish had been fulfilled. The dog he had wanted was protecting the family he had left behind. "Mommy," Emma asked, noticing her tears, "are you sad?" Sarah wiped her eyes, smiling through her tears. "No, sweetheart. Sometimes people cry when they're very happy. These are happy tears." Later that afternoon, as James helped clean up the picnic, Sarah found herself watching him with Max and Emma. The tall soldier had a gentleness about him that reminded her of Michael. The way he knelt to Emma's level when she spoke, the respectful way he addressed Max as sergeant during training exercises, the quiet competence of his movements. "We're going to visit the cemetery on Sunday," Sarah said suddenly. "It's Michael's birthday. Would you like to come with us?" James looked up, surprised by the invitation. "I wouldn't want to intrude on something so personal." "You wouldn't be intruding," Sarah assured him. "I think Michael would like knowing his daughter and his dog have such a good protector. And she hesitated, the words difficult after so long. "I would like you to be there." The morning of Michael's birthday dawned clear and bright. Sarah dressed Emma in her prettiest dress, clipped a new collar onto Max's neck, and met James at the entrance to the small military cemetery. He was in his formal uniform, a bouquet of simple white flowers in his hand. "For Michael," he explained, handing them to Emma, "and these are for you." He gave Sarah a single red rose. The gesture was small but significant. For the first time since Michael's death, Sarah felt something stir within her, a recognition that life continued, that new beginnings were possible even after devastating endings. They walked together to Michael's grave, Max padding solemnly beside Emma, as if understanding the significance of the day. At the headstone, Emma carefully arranged the white flowers, then sat cross-legged on the grass. "Hi, Daddy," she said clearly. "I brought Max to meet you. He's my special dog. He helps me when I get sick, and he plays with me, and he sleeps by my bed every night." She patted the ground beside her, and Max sat at attention, his ears perked forward as if listening to an invisible voice. Sarah knelt beside them, tracing Michael's name on the cold stone. "We're doing well, Michael," she whispered. "Emma is growing so fast. She has your eyes, your determination. And Max," she smiled at the German shepherd, "Max is everything you would have wanted in a dog, brave and loyal and protective." James stood a respectful distance away, giving them privacy. But as they prepared to leave, Sarah reached for his hand, drawing him closer. "This is James," she told the headstone. "His grandfather saved Max, and then James helped save Max again. He's been helping us, too. I think you would have liked him." As they walked back to the car, Emma skipping ahead with Max watchful at her side, James kept hold of Sarah's hand. "Thank you for including me today," he said quietly. Sarah smiled up at him, feeling lighter than she had in years. "Family belongs together," she said simply. 3 days later, a letter arrived from the Military Affairs Office. Sarah opened it with trembling hands, reading the formal acknowledgment that Sergeant Max, military identification number KG-72291, had been posthumously awarded a Purple Heart for injuries sustained in the line of duty. The medal would be presented at a ceremony the following month. "Did you do this?" she asked James over the phone. "Max earned it," he replied. "It was long overdue, and it completes his military record." When Sarah hung up, she found Emma and Max in the living room, the little girl reading a story to her attentive companion. Max's head rested on his paws, but his eyes never left Emma's face, his body positioned between her and the door in the protective stance that had become second nature. Sarah leaned against the door frame, watching them. From the rejected shelter dog no one wanted to a decorated military hero with a loving family, Max's journey had been as remarkable as their own. Together they had healed each other's wounds, filled each other's empty spaces, created something whole from fragments of pain and loss. "Time for dinner," she called. Mac's ears perked up, and Emma closed her book. "Can we eat outside?" "With the flowers?" "Yes," Sarah agreed, thinking of the garden they had planted in Michael's honor, the roses just beginning to bloom. "With the flowers." As they moved to the kitchen, Sarah felt a rare moment of perfect contentment. Their family wasn't traditional: a widow, a toddler with epilepsy, a retired military dog, and a soldier finding his way back to civilian life, but it was theirs, forged through struggle, strengthened by compassion, built on a foundation of love that transcended even death. Max trotted between Emma and Sarah, his mission clear. He was their guardian, their protector, their connector to a past they honored and a future they embraced. And in his steady presence, Sarah found the courage to move forward, one day at a time, into whatever waited ahead. When life has weathered your spirit and the world seems indifferent to your struggles, remember the story of Sarah, Emma, and Max. It reminds us that sometimes the most profound connections come when we're brave enough to open our hearts to those others have abandoned. Like many of you who've faced impossible choices, between security and compassion, between practicality and love, Sarah chose the harder path. She recognized something our younger generations often miss: that healing is reciprocal, that in saving another soul, we often save ourselves. Max wasn't just a dog with medical needs, he was a guardian finding his purpose again, much like many of you who've reinvented yourselves after retirement or loss. Emma's intuitive bond with Max reflects the wisdom we develop with age, knowing without explanation, understanding without words. This story honors the sacrifices you've made for family, the times you chose love over convenience, and your quiet courage in the face of judgment. It celebrates how your generation values loyalty and commitment in a disposable world. Remember, it's never too late to forge new connections, to be the person who says yes when everyone else says no. Your compassion can still change lives, perhaps even your own. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.